My father is supposedly hidden away in Europe working on a highly classified corporate project. I am Sabrina, a 27-year-old structural engineer who believed that fabrication for 2 entire years. Every time I asked about his whereabouts, my brother looked me dead in the eyes with the exact same rehearsed excuse. I was happily playing on the floor with my niece when she casually showed me a video playing on her tablet. The horrifying truth I witnessed on that glowing digital display almost made me dial emergency services immediately. Before diving into this shocking family betrayal, please subscribe to our channel so you never miss these incredible stories. My sedan turned into the familiar gravel driveway positioned directly in front of Kyle's suburban Portland villa. I stepped out of the vehicle, gripping my purse before walking briskly to knock loudly on the front door. Kyle opened the entryway, while casually repeating his script about our father Robert being stuck in Germany, negotiating a timber contract. He insisted our dad was legally bound by a strict non-disclosure agreement that forbade utilizing any personal communication devices. His wife Diana stepped out from the adjacent kitchen carrying water, while flashing a fake smile to confirm his ridiculous story. I removed my winter coat before sitting onto the rug to play wooden Jenga blocks with my 9-year-old niece, Ruby. The young girl eventually grew bored with stacking wooden pieces, so she reached over to grab her mother's personal tablet. The smart 9-year-old expertly swiped through the digital interface to press a hidden file tucked deeply inside the system settings. Without uttering a single warning about what she had just uncovered, Ruby held the glowing screen straight toward my unsuspecting face. The pale blue illumination from the digital screen cast a noticeable glow across Ruby's face, while she leaned closer to my shoulder. The 9-year-old girl kept her eyes locked on the display, before whispering that she had been pretending to film a daily vlog when she accidentally captured the footage playing before me. The camera angle remained extremely low to the ground, while the frame shook violently through a narrow gap in a heavy wooden basement door. The recorded footage revealed a poorly lit concrete room illuminated by a single flickering overhead bulb swinging slightly from the ceiling. My father Robert sat completely slumped forward in a metal wheelchair positioned directly in the center of the damp floor. His hair had turned entirely white since the last time I saw him 2 years ago. He wore a faded gray pajama set that hung loosely on his noticeably thinner frame, while his chin rested heavily against his frail chest. He barely moved except for the shallow rise of his shoulders, indicating his struggle to breathe normally in the stale basement air. Kyle suddenly stepped into the narrow camera frame holding a thick stack of printed legal documents. He slammed the papers down onto the metal table positioned directly in front of the wheelchair with extreme force. The loud smack echoed sharply through the small tablet speakers, causing my father to flinch visibly in his metal seat. Kyle leaned far over the table to forcefully shove a black ballpoint pen into our father's trembling right hand. He pointed aggressively at the bottom signature line of the timber mill transfer agreement while shouting commands I could barely decipher over the distorted audio recording. Diana stood directly behind the wheelchair with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, while watching the entire scene unfold with absolute coldness. She leaned her head down right next to his ear to issue a direct threat about his future access to the family. She promised to permanently revoke his visitation rights with his granddaughter if he refused to sign the documents immediately. My brother added another loud remark about how the local authorities would never believe the testimony of an old man who had lost his mind. My father slowly shook his head from side to side, before his fingers finally gave out completely under the immense pressure. The black pen slipped right out of his shaking grasp to clatter loudly onto the cold concrete floor, just as the video recording abruptly stopped. My entire body went completely rigid while the tablet screen faded back to its colorful home interface. I forced my vocal cords to function while attempting to keep my voice as steady as possible to avoid alarming the observant child sitting directly beside me. I looked directly into her eyes before asking exactly where her grandfather was located right now. The observant 9-year-old looked back at me with absolute clarity before detailing an extremely specific driving routine. She explained her father commanded her to wait inside the locked pickup truck yesterday afternoon while they completed an errand. She watched both parents carry a large white pill bottle toward a secluded red brick house located high up on the mountain. Ruby admitted she deliberately unbuckled her seatbelt to sneak out of the parked vehicle when they left her alone for an extended period. She quietly navigated her way around the side of the brick building to peek through a ground-level window while her parents were occupied inside the facility. She told me she clearly saw her grandfather sleeping in a hospital bed, but immediately noticed his face looked incredibly sad, even while his eyes remained tightly closed. Every single word she spoke hit my chest like a heavy physical blow, while the false reality I lived in finally shattered completely. I reached out to grip the thick edge of the woolen rug underneath us, until my knuckles turned completely white against the fabric. I bit down hard on my lower lip while taking a massive breath of air into my lungs. I focused entirely on controlling my breathing to force my violently trembling hands to remain completely still before anyone could walk back into the living room. The sharp clicking sound of Diana striking her high stilettos against the upper wooden staircase echoed loudly down into the living room area. I immediately snatched the tablet right out of my niece's hands to activate the wireless sharing feature before sending the video file directly to my personal phone. My thumbs moved rapidly across the glowing screen to permanently delete the transfer history from the application before handing the device back to the child sitting beside me. I jumped to my feet while simultaneously pulling my phone from my pocket to stage a fake conversation about a massive structural failure at my downtown steel construction project. I spoke loudly enough for the approaching footsteps to hear my fabricated instructions regarding an emergency site evacuation while aggressively shoving my arms into my heavy winter coat. I walked briskly toward the front door without waiting for any further conversation or offering any polite farewells to the people walking downstairs. Kyle stepped forward from the hallway attempting to offer a weekend dinner invitation, but I completely ignored his gesture while rushing outside to unlock my vehicle. I slid into the driver's seat before engaging the automatic door locks instantly, while throwing the gear shift into reverse to back out of the driveway at a dangerously high speed. My eyes darted constantly toward the rearview mirror to ensure nobody was following my vehicle out of the suburban subdivision. My right foot pressed down hard on the accelerator pedal until I cleared exactly 3 intersections away from their quiet neighborhood. I slammed my foot onto the brake pedal to pull the sedan violently over to the side of the empty road before throwing the transmission into park. My shaking fingers dialed the emergency dispatch number before resting heavily over the green call button on the glowing glass screen. The line connected for exactly 1 ring before I suddenly slammed my thumb down onto the red disconnect icon to terminate the call completely. A deeply buried memory from exactly 2 years ago suddenly surfaced in my mind regarding a specific legal conversation with my brother during a holiday dinner. Kyle had aggressively bragged about successfully persuading our father to sign comprehensive medical conservatorship documents, granting him total legal control over all healthcare decisions. If a local police cruiser showed up at their front door tonight responding to an emergency call, Kyle would simply present those legally binding documents to the patrol officers. The responding authorities would evaluate the paperwork before immediately classifying the entire situation as a civil family dispute, rather than a criminal matter. The officers would leave the premises without conducting any further investigation, while effectively alerting my brother that his massive deception had been uncovered. Kyle would immediately relocate our father to an entirely new, undisclosed location, long before I could ever convince a local judge to issue a legal search warrant. I gripped the leather steering wheel tightly while trying to process the horrifying reality of my father being held captive under the disguise of legal protection. I opened my contact list to scroll rapidly past dozens of professional acquaintances until my finger stopped directly on a specific individual. Seth was a highly experienced former state investigator who specialized exclusively in complex elder abuse cases across the Pacific Northwest region. I had originally met him during a highly contentious commercial property line dispute last year, where he demonstrated an incredible ability to uncover hidden corporate documents. I pressed the call button while desperately hoping he would actually answer his personal phone on a weekend evening without requiring a formally scheduled appointment. The line clicked open after the third ring with his familiar gruff voice asking exactly what kind of trouble I had managed to find myself in this time. I informed him that I possessed video evidence of severe physical intimidation involving a highly vulnerable family member trapped in a fraudulent guardianship situation. I instructed him to meet me at his office immediately because I needed his specialized investigative skills to track down a captive family member who was currently being held against his will. Seth asked absolutely no unnecessary questions before agreeing to unlock his commercial office building within the next hour. He instructed me to secure every single piece of digital evidence I possessed before hanging up the receiver. My sedan pulled away from the concrete curb to merge seamlessly into the heavy evening traffic heading directly toward the illuminated skyline of downtown Portland. Exactly 8:30 arrived, while the overwhelming aroma of freshly brewed black coffee completely saturated Seth's private investigative office workspace. I connected my personal mobile device directly into his computer system to project the hidden video file onto his larger viewing monitor. Seth manipulated the digital playback controls to reduce the frame rate significantly before freezing the image entirely on the white container resting atop the metal table. He leaned extremely close to the glowing monitor to examine the blurred pixels containing a distinct red barcode label printed along the plastic curvature. His extensive professional background investigating regional medical facilities allowed him to immediately identify the specific specialty pharmacy dispensing highly regulated heavy sedatives throughout the state of Oregon. He confirmed my worst suspicions by explaining how those specific pharmaceutical compounds essentially stripped away all cognitive resistance from vulnerable patients. I watched his fingers type rapidly across the mechanical keyboard to cross-reference the pharmacy location with local property records to build a preliminary geographical profile. We executed our physical surveillance operation during late Wednesday evening, utilizing his completely unmarked dark sedan equipped with tinted windows. We parked the vehicle carefully behind a row of thick evergreen bushes located exactly 2 residential blocks away from my brother's suburban property. Kyle eventually backed his large Ford pickup truck out of the illuminated driveway to merge onto the main arterial road heading toward the city outskirts. Seth maintained a strategically safe distance while we followed the targeted vehicle traveling eastbound directly along the desolate stretches of Highway 26. The heavy Oregon rainfall began drumming aggressively against the windshield while the dense evergreen forests swallowed the illumination from our headlights completely. I gripped the passenger door handle tightly while watching the red taillights of my brother's truck navigating the winding mountain elevation routes. Seth steered the vehicle expertly through the hazardous weather conditions without ever allowing our target to slip completely out of his visual range. The heavy truck eventually veered off the main paved highway to navigate a winding gravel path leading directly toward a secluded compound named Cedar Rest. Seth killed the headlights immediately before pulling our sedan onto a hidden dirt shoulder overlooking the isolated medical facility nestled deep within the Mount Hood foothills. He immediately deployed his high-powered tactical binoculars to monitor the heavy iron gates while meticulously logging the exact timing of the security personnel shift changes. He managed to magnify the visual field enough to intercept the nightly medication delivery schedule, clipped directly onto a passing nursing cart, illuminated by a courtyard spotlight. The magnified text clearly listed my father, Robert, designated specifically to room 114 located inside the highly secured, isolated wing of the brick building. We remained perfectly still inside the freezing vehicle for several hours while documenting every single detail regarding the physical security protocols protecting the fraudulent medical operation. The following morning shifted our investigation entirely toward tracing the massive corporate financial discrepancies through publicly available business filings inside Seth's office. Seth partnered directly with a certified forensic accountant to systematically bypass the complex layers of intentionally fabricated corporate documentation, hiding the true money flow. They spent hours analyzing stacks of bank statements while I paced nervously across the worn wooden floorboards of the cramped investigative workspace. The accountant successfully uncovered an elaborate scheme where Kyle systematically divided our generational timber forests into smaller, untraceable land parcels over the past 2 years. He rapidly liquidated the pristine pine territories to funnel millions of dollars directly into an anonymous Delaware shell corporation legally registered under Diana's maiden name. The massive transfer of generational wealth occurred exactly during the time frame when my father supposedly signed those fraudulent medical conservatorship documents inside the basement. Seth printed out the massive paper trail containing every single fraudulent land transfer deed alongside the corresponding out-of-state bank deposits. He spread the physical evidence across his wooden desk to visually connect the timeline of the medical abuse directly with the massive corporate theft. The calculated deception involved moving vast sums of corporate capital across state lines to deliberately avoid local tax scrutiny or internal board audits. My brother had effectively transformed our legitimate family timber operation into a massive personal piggy bank while keeping the rightful owner heavily sedated in a mountain facility. Seth pressed the tip of his red marker firmly against the printed financial statement to draw a thick circle around the undeniable proof of federal money laundering. Exactly 2 weeks passed while heavy rain continuously battered against the thick glass windows surrounding the downtown legal conference room. I slid the massive stack of gathered investigative documents across the polished mahogany table toward Mr. Cole. The highly experienced attorney specialized exclusively in dismantling fraudulent conservatorship cases throughout the state judicial system. He meticulously examined every single page containing the financial tracking records before firmly sliding the documents back across the table. Mr. Cole explicitly stated that local authorities would arrest me for kidnapping if I simply drove up to the mountain facility to physically remove my father without proper legal authorization. He explained how Kyle currently possessed total legal control over every aspect of his medical care through the previously signed court documents. We desperately needed an undeniable medical justification to successfully bypass the existing guardianship framework before approaching any active judge for an emergency intervention. The attorney required absolute procedural perfection to prevent Kyle from utilizing his existing legal status to block our rescue attempt. Mr. Cole tapped his expensive fountain pen against the wooden surface while formulating a precise legal strategy to break through the fraudulent legal barrier. Mr. Cole immediately requested a specialized consultation by bringing Dr. Bennett into our private meeting room to evaluate the digital evidence. The independent clinical neurologist possessed decades of professional experience identifying physical signs of intentional medical abuse within captive, vulnerable populations. I activated my phone screen to play the hidden basement recording for the specialized medical expert sitting across the table. Dr. Bennett paused the footage repeatedly to carefully observe my father's drooping facial muscles alongside his severe inability to maintain basic motor control. The doctor immediately identified multiple undeniable clinical indicators pointing directly toward the forced administration of heavy chemical restraints designed specifically to eliminate cognitive resistance. He pulled out his laptop to rapidly draft a preliminary independent medical examination report detailing the absolute physical danger threatening the patient. The finalized medical document explicitly concluded that the current isolated environment posed an immediate threat to the subject's fundamental survival. Dr. Bennett officially stamped his professional medical credential seal onto the printed evaluation report before handing the critical document directly over to our legal representative. Armed with the critical medical evaluation, Mr. Cole finalized the formal application requesting an emergency welfare check from the judicial system. We traveled directly toward the Multnomah County Circuit Court building to present our compiled evidence before the presiding district judge. Mr. Cole approached the elevated wooden bench to submit the official petition alongside the detailed forensic accounting reports, proving the massive asset liquidation. He positioned a portable electronic tablet directly in front of the judge to play the hidden basement recording depicting the physical intimidation. The attorney delivered a forceful legal argument highlighting the undeniable connection between the forced medical sedation alongside the massive financial theft occurring simultaneously. He explicitly requested the immediate suspension of Kyle's conservatorship powers, pending a full criminal investigation into the corporate embezzlement scheme. He argued passionately that leaving my father under the current fraudulent guardianship would result in irreversible physical harm before a standard trial could ever commence. Mr. Cole stood completely upright with his hands clasped firmly behind his back while awaiting the final decision from the bench. The presiding judge carefully reviewed the certified financial bank statements before reading through Dr. Bennett's preliminary medical evaluation report with absolute silence. The magistrate then watched the digital video recording multiple times while maintaining a completely unreadable expression on his aged face. He slowly leaned forward over the elevated wooden desk to closely examine the forged signature present on the initial guardianship transfer document. He eventually picked up his heavy ink pen to decisively sign his signature across the bottom of the requested ex parte order. The newly authorized legal document officially mandated an immediate medical intervention, while specifically requiring the local sheriff's office to provide armed law enforcement escorts. The judge forcefully struck his wooden gavel against the sounding block to officially execute the emergency ruling granting us total legal authority over the situation. I pushed my body through the heavy brass doors of the courthouse while stepping rapidly into the freezing Oregon rain. I raised the officially stamped legal document high into the air toward Dr. Bennett, waiting patiently beside a private medical transport vehicle. Thick morning fog rolled heavily across the damp gravel pathway, leading directly toward the rusting iron gates securing the isolated Cedar Rest medical compound. The digital dashboard clock struck exactly 7 when two uniformed Multnomah County Sheriff deputies stepped out from their marked patrol cruisers to strike their heavy tactical flashlights repeatedly against the reinforced metal entrance. A disorganized facility manager rushed out from the front security booth, attempting to physically block the official law enforcement personnel from entering the private medical premises. Mr. Cole immediately stepped forward to press the officially authorized judicial document directly against the protesting manager's chest while loudly reciting the specific legal statutes mandating immediate compliance under the threat of federal arrest. The bewildered employee surrendered instantly by signaling the private security guards to activate the electronic mechanism controlling the massive steel barricade blocking our entry. I sprinted aggressively past the yielding staff members to navigate the sterile white corridors reeking strongly of industrial disinfectants, while following the painted directional lines pointing toward the restricted residential wing located at the back of the building. Two armed deputies flanked my sides while I forcefully kicked open the solid wooden door marking room 114 located at the very end of the highly isolated hallway. My father, Robert, lay completely immobilized atop the adjustable hospital mattress, taking incredibly shallow breaths that barely moved his frail chest under the thin cotton blanket. Thick canvas medical restraints completely bound his wrists tightly against the cold metal bed rails, leaving deep red friction marks across his remarkably pale skin. I pulled a sharp pair of medical shears from my heavy coat pocket to sever the thick fabric straps trapping his arms before gently pulling his upper body toward my waiting shoulder. His unfocused eyes stared blankly toward the white acoustic ceiling tiles, while his head lolled heavily against my collarbone, lacking any voluntary muscle control over his own physical movements. The uniformed deputies quickly positioned a mobile collapsible stretcher directly beside the mattress to assist me in transferring his dead weight onto the temporary transport apparatus without causing further physical trauma. I gripped the aluminum push handles tightly to propel the loaded stretcher rapidly down the echoing corridors, while entirely ignoring the shouting medical staff attempting to intervene in our legal extraction process. We blasted through the main sliding glass exit doors to load the elevated gurney directly into the specialized transport vehicle idling loudly near the concrete entrance ramp. Dr. Bennett immediately stepped inside the cramped rear compartment to lock the specialized safety mechanisms before tightening a thick rubber tourniquet around my father's severely bruised forearm. The experienced neurologist skillfully located a viable vein to insert a hollow needle, connecting directly to a series of vacuum-sealed glass collection tubes required for the laboratory tests. Dark crimson liquid quickly filled 3 separate medical vials required for conducting comprehensive toxicology screenings at the Central Forensic Laboratory waiting in the city. The doctor carefully labeled each glass cylinder meticulously before sealing the collected samples inside a tamper-evident plastic chain of custody evidence bag designed for criminal prosecution proceedings. He cracked open the rear ambulance doors slightly to hand the secured package directly to a waiting medical technician straddling a high-performance motorcycle idling loudly nearby. The courier secured the crucial biological evidence inside a locked thermal container before accelerating violently down the mountain road to transport the blood samples directly to the analytical chemists standing by. Dr. Bennett immediately turned his attention back to his vulnerable patient by hanging a large transparent bag of intravenous saline solution high above the metal gurney. He carefully connected the clear plastic tubing to the existing intravenous line to begin flushing the debilitating chemical sedatives completely out of the patient's heavily saturated bloodstream. The emergency transport driver threw the heavy vehicle into gear, while simultaneously activating the piercing roof sirens to clear our downward path through the morning traffic. The ambulance tires screeched violently against the wet gravel surface while peeling away from the shady mountain facility at absolute maximum speed. Looking through the rear medical bay window revealed the panicking facility manager frantically dialing his mobile phone while staring helplessly at our rapidly disappearing red taillights. He would undoubtedly contact Kyle within seconds to report the catastrophic failure of his highly orchestrated fraudulent medical prison operation. Exactly 45 days passed while the invigorating scent of freshly chopped pine timber completely filled our secluded lakeside safe house. The heavy chemical sedatives finally washed out of my father's system entirely, following weeks of rigorous daily intravenous fluid treatments. Robert walked across the polished wooden floorboards with remarkably steady footsteps, displaying the formidable commanding presence he possessed before his captivity. His previously clouded mind regained its absolute tactical sharpness, while he meticulously reviewed the certified laboratory toxicology reports spread across the table. The forensic blood analysis officially confirmed the dangerously high concentrations of synthetic neurological inhibitors previously circulating through his vulnerable veins. He placed the horrifying medical documents aside before picking up the comprehensive financial dossiers detailing the massive offshore embezzlement scheme. His jaw clenched tightly while his eyes scanned through the undeniable proof detailing his own son systematically dismantling his generational empire. He gripped the edges of the financial statements so firmly that the thick paper began tearing slightly under his immense physical pressure. He refused to show any outward signs of weakness, despite learning about the absolute betrayal committed by his own flesh. My father immediately issued strict orders requiring absolute secrecy regarding his miraculous physical recovery to construct the perfect tactical trap. He understood perfectly that revealing his survival prematurely would simply allow his treacherous son enough time to flee the state jurisdiction entirely. Robert sat heavily behind the massive mahogany desk before pulling out his favorite gold fountain pen to execute his calculated legal retaliation. He forcefully signed a mountain of prepared legal injunctions immediately revoking the fraudulent medical conservatorship previously granted to my brother. His rapid signatures officially froze every single corporate credit account currently accessible to the corrupt executive management team operating the firm. Mr. Cole secured the freshly signed documents inside his leather briefcase before secretly transmitting encrypted emergency notifications directly toward the corporate board members. The confidential memorandum summoned the senior corporate directors toward a mandatory emergency assembly without revealing the true nature of the upcoming gathering. Our strategic silence essentially encouraged the arrogant thief to walk blindly into a devastating ambush positioned directly inside his own boardroom. Every single trusted shareholder received the urgent summons commanding their physical presence at the corporate headquarters for a highly classified announcement. Seth maintained constant electronic surveillance on my brother during this entire recovery period to monitor his increasingly erratic professional behavior. Kyle completely lost his mind upon discovering the empty hospital bed, but utterly failed to contact any local law enforcement authorities. He correctly calculated that filing an official missing persons report would immediately expose his illegal offshore money laundering operation to federal investigators. The terrified executive paced furiously inside his corner corporate office while desperately attempting to salvage his rapidly collapsing financial empire. Kyle ultimately decided to execute a final desperate maneuver by aggressively scheduling an extraordinary emergency shareholder meeting for the following morning. He planned to present forged psychiatric evaluations declaring the company founder permanently incapacitated due to an advanced irreversible neurological disease. This fabricated medical narrative would theoretically provide him with the ultimate legal authority required to permanently transfer total corporate ownership. He ordered his administrative staff to prepare the binding transfer resolutions, assuming nobody could possibly challenge his falsified medical documentation. The deceitful son believed he could steal the entire multi-million-dollar operation before anyone discovered his captive prisoner had successfully escaped. The early morning sunlight filtered through the cabin windows, illuminating the wooden interior right before our scheduled departure time arrived. Robert stood confidently before the tall hallway mirror while shrugging his broad shoulders into a meticulously tailored charcoal gray business suit. He methodically adjusted the expensive silver cufflinks securing his crisp white shirt sleeves before smoothing down the heavy wool fabric. He possessed the exact same intimidating corporate aura that originally built the most successful timber conglomerate across the entire Pacific Northwest region. His piercing gaze reflected a deep determination to completely destroy the deceitful individuals who intentionally imprisoned him for 2 miserable years. My father grabbed his heavy leather briefcase firmly by the polished brass handle before pushing the solid wooden front door wide open. He stepped purposefully out into the freezing morning air to finally reclaim his stolen legacy from the traitors waiting downtown. He marched directly toward the waiting vehicle without looking back at the safe house that facilitated his miraculous return to power. Bright camera flashes continuously illuminated the massive oak-paneled corporate boardroom, while numerous gathered shareholders eagerly awaited the highly anticipated executive leadership transition announcement. Kyle stood confidently behind the elevated wooden podium, holding a gold fountain pen to officially sign the binding resolution permanently removing his founder father from power. He leaned toward the microphone to deliver a fabricated speech detailing the supposedly declining mental health severely affecting the former company president over the past 2 years. The deceitful executive prepared to execute the final signature required to legally transfer total ownership of the massive timber empire directly into his own greedy hands. Several prominent board members nodded silently while preparing to witness the fraudulent transfer of generational wealth orchestrated by the treacherous son standing before them. The heavy mahogany double doors suddenly burst wide open, causing the entire room of restless investors to turn their heads simultaneously toward the hallway entrance. I stepped confidently into the crowded room alongside Mr. Cole before deliberately stepping aside to reveal the commanding figure walking steadily behind us. Robert strode powerfully down the center aisle wearing his immaculate charcoal gray suit, while projecting absolute unyielding authority over the completely stunned corporate assembly. Kyle visibly recoiled from the approaching figure before dropping his expensive pen onto the polished hardwood floor, with a surprisingly loud clattering sound echoing across the silent room. My father ascended the podium steps deliberately to snatch the microphone directly out of his trembling hands without offering a single word of greeting or explanation. Robert spoke clearly into the amplified sound system to instantly terminate Kyle from all corporate positions, while completely nullifying the fraudulent medical proxy documents previously filed. The entire boardroom erupted into chaotic murmurs, while the realization of the massive deception finally settled over the confused corporate shareholders observing the hostile takeover reversal. Seth immediately hijacked the overhead projection system to broadcast the undeniable digital evidence directly onto the massive screen, positioned directly behind the wooden stage. The graphic basement abuse video played silently alongside the certified toxicology reports, displaying the lethal chemical concentrations previously forced into my vulnerable father. The private investigator simultaneously displayed the complex financial routing documents proving Kyle deliberately funneled massive corporate funds directly toward an anonymous Delaware shell corporation, secretly registered under Diana. The meticulous forensic accountant successfully traced every single stolen dollar flowing through the intricate web of fake vendor invoices designed specifically to bypass the internal corporate audit protocols. Moving stolen corporate assets across state jurisdictions legally elevated the massive financial theft into a federal wire fraud prosecution, triggering immediate federal jurisdiction, overriding local authorities. Several armed Federal Bureau of Investigation agents marched through the entrance doors accompanied by uniformed Portland police officers, executing the massive coordinated raid targeting the corrupt executives. The lead federal agent presented a comprehensive federal indictment warrant directly to the trembling man standing completely paralyzed behind the wooden podium. The federal authorities forcefully secured both Kyle alongside his completely silent wife in heavy steel handcuffs before loudly reading them their constitutional rights right inside the boardroom. The disgraced couple walked out of the corporate building surrounded entirely by federal law enforcement personnel, heading directly toward the waiting transport vehicles parked outside the headquarters. Several grueling months passed inside the local family court system, while magistrates thoroughly reviewed the overwhelming evidence proving severe parental unfitness regarding the convicted felons. The prosecutors presented the hidden basement video recordings during the custody hearings to completely demonstrate the psychological danger surrounding the previous household environment. The presiding judge officially terminated the parental rights previously held by the incarcerated couple before legally finalizing my formal adoption petition regarding my niece Ruby. The young girl finally experienced a stable living environment surrounded entirely by genuine familial affection, far away from the manipulative individuals currently serving lengthy federal prison sentences. Robert comfortably resumed his rightful position, steering the generational timber conglomerate toward unprecedented financial success without ever relying on any treacherous family members again. The three of us stood peacefully together on the elevated wooden balcony overlooking the tranquil lake water, shimmering beautifully under the bright afternoon sun. We completely severed all ties with the incarcerated traitors, while finally beginning our newly restored lives, totally free from their past toxic manipulation forever.